Moshal viewers, welcome back. Today, our friend Ms. Tom Heffer is going to present a very interesting topic. Hello, Mr. Heffer.
Hello, Dr. Liu. It's good to see you again. You're looking well.
Thank you.
Today we'll talk about what to do when one particular political candidate does not achieve a majority. What are the alternatives and how should they be viewed? And specifically, we'll get into ranked choice voting because that's what a lot of people think is great. And in some ways it is, but in some ways it isn't. Here we are, ranked choice voting. What's good and what's bad? What are the alternatives for voting if there are more than two candidates for a given seat and no one gets a majority? Well, there are quite a few. So one of the ones that's used most commonly today is plurality wins. So this is what happens in most presidential primaries and elections. The chosen candidate does not represent a majority. For example, in 2016, Donald Trump did not win a majority in any of the early states where he was vying for the Republican nomination, but he did have a plurality. So he got all of the delegates from Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina, and eventually he just rolled on to win the whole thing. And another problem is that a third party candidate can radically change the outcome. For example, in 1992, George H.W. Bush, Bush the first versus Clinton, had a third party candidate, Ross Perot, and did not get majorities in almost all of the states. The only ones that he got outright majorities in were Arkansas, where he was from, and the District of Columbia. Nevertheless, because of plurality voting, he got all the delegates, and he went on to almost a 70% electoral college win. So third parties are really problematic when you have a plurality system. So one alternative, runoffs. The problem with this is that it requires a second election at a later date. So you have to go through all the ballots printed and all of that. And one problem is that the voters in that second election may be different from the ones in the original election. For example, 2020 in the Georgia Senate race of Perdue versus Ossoff, there was a third party candidate, Don Hazel. And in the initial election, he got almost 2% of the vote, which barely denied David Perdue an outright majority. So they had a runoff, but the runoff wasn't until January the 5th. By then, a number of new voters had registered, some who mysteriously appeared from out of state, but they could register because the runoff election wasn't till the 5th of January, so they had until early December to register. So new voters determined the outcome of that runoff election and possibly changed it. Other possibilities, approval voting. You just vote for everyone that you approve of. The problem with this is that the total number of votes will be far larger than the total number of voters. So it's very confusing and disorienting, and people don't understand it. Ranked choice. This is what we'll talk about today. You pick your first choice, your second choice, and so on down the line. And we'll go into that in a moment. And there are still others. Score this guy 100%. I score the other guy 80%. I score the next guy 40%. And then they have the very confusing. So really two criteria. First, are the majority of the voters satisfied with the eventual outcome? And second, the system, whatever it is, should not promote gaming by the political parties. Ranked choice voting. Does it produce better results? Well, first of all, what is it? Well, so each ballot has a place for your first choice candidate, your second choice, and so on amongst all the valid candidates. And just like in regular voting, if any candidate gets more than 50% of the vote, he or she wins. But if no one gets 50%, then the bottom finisher is eliminated. And then those ballots are awarded to the second choice that those voters had. So now if somebody has more than 50%, they win. And if they don't, then they do it again and they eliminate the next to bottom. And then the bottom finishers, third choices, and the next choices. So this is kind of confusing. So let's go through an example. So here's a ballot. So let's just say that you like A the best. So you vote for him as your first choice. Then you like candidate D the next most. So you vote for him as your second choice. Candidate B, well, you like him better than C. So you make him your third choice, and then you leave the fourth choice blank. So that's how the ballots would look and what you might do. How does that work? Well, if there's only a single seat available in the election, it can work pretty well. So here's an example. 1,000 people vote. Candidate A has a very loyal base of 35%, but other voters don't like him. We'll just say, for example, that candidate A might be Bernie Sanders, and candidates B, C, and D are everybody else. Here's the first round of voting. Candidate A, our notional Bernie Sanders, gets out of the 1,000 votes 350. So he gets 35% of the total vote. And then B gets 30%, and C gets 25%, and D gets 10%. In other forms of voting, such as for most of the primaries, A would win. So that's a plurality system, just like most of the primaries have. Alternatively, there could be a runoff between A and B, which requires another vote to be taken. But in ranked choice voting, it's different. So the candidate with the least votes, which is candidate D, gets eliminated. So down here, he's shown in red. And so his 100 ballots are examined for second choices. So that looks like this. So none of candidate D's voters like candidate A. So 60 of them went for candidate C and 40 of them went for candidate B. So now candidate A still has the lead, 35%, B has 34, C has 31. So still no winner. So what do? So we eliminate candidate C. So here's what happened in that second round. This is just a repeat. So when we eliminate candidate C, we take the 250 votes that he got plus the 60 that he was awarded from candidate D and distribute them. And it turns out that all 310 of those did not like candidate A. They voted for candidate B. So he wins. That's what happens in ranked choice voting. And the reason that it happens is because voters for candidate C essentially got to vote 2 times, and voters for candidate D got to vote 3 times. But on the whole, it's still probably a good outcome because only 35% of the people wanted candidate A to win. So B was probably preferable to the majority of the voters. That's probably a good result. However, what happens when there are multiple seats being contested? So let's suppose that we've got the same 1,000 people, but there's one major issue that concerns the voters, whether to do A or B. So to make this concrete, we'll just say that 2 candidates are in favor of option A, which we'll just say is to secure the southern border. And the other 2 candidates are in favor of option B, which is to have an open border, and that's the most important issue that people are concerned with. So what happens? So in the first round of voting, candidate A1 gets 350 votes, candidate A2 gets 300, B1 gets 250, and B2 gets 100. So if there were a vote between position A, the closed border, and position B, the open border, A would win 65% to 35% because those are the votes that candidates A1 and A2 got. But in ranked choice voting, candidate B2 is eliminated. So his 100 votes go to candidate B1, who now has 350 votes, tied with candidate A1. So candidate A2 is eliminated, even though the majority of the voters clearly preferred option A. And this is because candidate B2's votes get counted twice, but A2 does not get the benefit of A1's second choice votes, which would have resulted in her beating candidate B1. So in multiple seat elections, ranked choice voting can be undemocratic. So what are the lessons from this? Well, ranked choice voting may be beneficial in single seat elections by preventing candidates with small pluralities from winning, despite the fact that most people don't want them. Ranked choice voting may not produce fair results in multi-seat elections. Ranked choice voting requires an informed and engaged electorate in order to avoid anomalous results. You have to evaluate multiple candidates. Most people have a hard enough time deciding on one. Is this really a realistic option? Also, anomalous results can occur if a significant percentage of voters simply don't understand or use ranked choice voting correctly. For example, if all of the Republicans fail to put in a second and third choice, but all of the Democrats do, the Democrats will win virtually every time. So the question is, will this cause mistrust? Will we be going through the same stolen election dispute after every election? It'll also mean that political parties may try to game the system by running as many candidates as possible, because even unpopular candidates will probably pick up a few percent of the vote. You know, some people will vote for Marianne Williamson, even though they know she doesn't have a chance. But if the Democrats put her in, and then her votes, when she loses, accrue up to the preferred Democrat candidate, then they will pick up all of those votes. And by the same token, if you're a political candidate and you're unlikely to win, you need to tell your constituents whom to vote for as their second and third choices, because if you don't, then somebody from the opposite side is likely to win. So that concludes the lesson for today. Next time, we'll talk about how someone other than Trump or Biden could become president in 2024.
Great, interesting, and easy to follow. So it looks to me, I think maybe we can first try those kind of ranked choice voting in small and very informed voters to see the result, do some practice. But I don't think it's a good idea to quickly use this voting system to do like a big presidential election. I don't think so.
Well, I would like to see it instituted in the primaries, because I want candidates who represent the majority of that party's voters, not a small plurality. But I'll tell you an interesting anecdote. So right here in Arlington County, the county board decided that for the last election, in which there were 2 seats that were open, that they would try ranked choice voting. And there was a very contentious issue called missing middle, where they want to rezone all of the single family lots and make them into 6 and 8 apartment units. So 2 of the candidates were very opposed to this, and then 4 of them were in favor of it. But because of ranked choice voting and exactly what I showed with the discussion of the border being open or closed, the 2 candidates who were opposed to missing middle got the majority of, or got the largest number of votes in the first round, but one of them was eliminated because all of the people who were in favor of missing middle, their votes rolled up to one of the other people in favor of missing middle, and the second opponent was dropped out. So it was split, 1 for, 1 against, which is exactly what I think the county board wanted, because otherwise they'd have had 2 people opposed to their plan. And then the county board said, oh, that was too complicated. We're going back to regular voting in the fall. So a cynic would say that that might be because the Republicans will have a candidate, maybe more than one, in the fall election. So if all of the people who want to vote Republican voted for one of, let's say, 2 or 3 candidates, and they had ranked choice voting, it could be that all of those votes would roll up and a Republican would get elected. And that would never do in Arlington County.
Okay, interesting. I think that the results, since there are mixed results, so the both parties probably are hesitated to really push this kind of voting methods, because there's no secure for their candidate can definitely win. Okay, that's great. Thank you for today, and I look forward to talk to you next time.